Hello guys and welcome back, all 2,100 members of this channel. Today we're going to be talking about that Mercedes team and if they're really starting to implode from the inside out, or at least if communication has gone to a point of no return with Lewis's side of the garage along with Toto and George's side of the garage. After the Monaco Grand Prix weekend, it became pretty clear that there was definitely some fractures starting to appear in the Mercedes camp. From FP1 all the way to FP3, either George or Lewis was included in one of the top three in terms of the practice sessions, but by the time it came to qualifying, none of them could really string a lap together, with George getting the better of Lewis. Now afterwards, Lewis gave an interview which many would consider, and I would also consider, very suspect in terms of what is going on behind the scenes at Mercedes. He reported the fact that George is getting preferential treatment in terms of upgrades, how essentially they're starting to build the car around him, and to further that, he doesn't believe that he's going to beat George in qualifying at all this year. Now, before we tackle some of the stuff that he said, I think it's almost imperative that if you haven't seen it, you should see what he says. And not only what he says, but his face when he's saying it, almost as a smug, well, I kind of expected this type of face. And although this is kind of hard to imagine because of the relationship Lewis has with the Mercedes and the people in Brackley and just the whole team, he's been there for 11 years, going on basically 12 years, I'm pretty sure. So you would expect that his relationship with everyone will be so strong that to the end they would be supporting him. But maybe something has been going on behind the scenes that we just didn't know about. And now it's started to come to fruition now that Lewis is leaving the team next year for Ferrari. In terms of the preferential treatment, we obviously know that Lewis is leaving, so it's not a surprise that they give George preferential treatment in terms of upgrades. Most of the time, it was, generally speaking, they would bring 2 upgrades to the weekend. And if they didn't bring 2 upgrades to the weekend, they would either go on Lewis's car. I think what Lewis is trying to say is that not only are upgrades coming to George's car first, but they're upgrades that he would like. And that would probably play a factor as to why he doesn't think he would be able to beat George in qualifying, because George is getting the upgrades first and the upgrades are geared around his driving style. Obviously, Lewis has come under a lot of criticism this year in terms of where he's placed and the fact that he's been beaten by George in a head-to-head so far. However, the points gap between them isn't that big. I don't even think it's up to 10 points. So it's not like there's some sort of insurmountable gap between George and Lewis. The difference between them is usually less than a tenth. And in the race, George has been slightly slower than Lewis on race pace. But I think his Mercedes and for, I think, Toto, is to really knuckle down and accept the fact that Lewis is gone and trying to move on to the next driver. Now, obviously, we know that there is a Mercedes seat that is free. And if Carlos Sainz doesn't take that seat, it might go to Kimi Antonelli. Obviously, we thought he was going to go to Williams, but it seems like the rumors are he's going to go straight to Mercedes in 2025. Now, in terms of Kimi Antonelli, personally, I think there's quite a bit of hype around Kimi Antonelli that he doesn't deserve. The last thing I would like to happen is for Kimi Antonelli, an 18-year-old, I'm pretty sure, to come into F1 with all this hype, go against a George Russell that's trying to prove himself, and he just get outmatched and outclassed and, well, tossed by the wayside as someone who couldn't live up to his potential when really too much was placed on his shoulders too soon. Now, obviously, Lewis got a 1+1 contract, with the second year being an option to extend at Mercedes. And for those of you who don't know, Lewis was actually asking for a longer contract and a deeper role in the Mercedes camp, even though they weren't winning. This was obviously before he started negotiating with Ferrari, but Mercedes declined this and gave him a 1+1. And the consensus was that the reason they gave this to him was because they were preparing inevitably for Kimi Antonelli to come in, whether that be in 2026 or 2027. They needed an option to get Lewis out because obviously they wouldn't sack George long term. That wouldn't be a good decision. And Lewis is, nearing the end of his career. This obviously upset Lewis, and he obviously got the vibe that they were trying to phase him out of the team, along with the fact that they didn't listen to him. And it seems like now we're really starting to see the fruits of that communication and that trust and relationship break down. It started off with the contracts, and it really does start to feel that like that Mercedes camp is starting to be split. Many people from that Mercedes team are being poached by Ferrari. Lewis is desperately trying to negotiate with Mercedes to get Bono and some of his engineers to leave Mercedes and come with him to Ferrari. And that's obviously upset some Mercedes guys, I'm sure, along with Toto Wolff. And although this is what I would say nothing like the whole Red Bull situation of Christian Horner, this is definitely a situation in which communication in the team has started to break down, and you can start to really poke holes and see on track where there is a disconnect between the team and see that there are definitely some cracks showing. Many people have outright said the S word, that Lewis is being sabotaged by Mercedes. I'm still not quite convinced Lewis is being sabotaged, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that Mercedes are helping his case. They definitely want him to do well, and for a team to want to sabotage one of their drivers, it's really unlikely. It's one of a kind, to be honest, because for a driver to do well, that indirectly also means the team does well, or directly does mean the team does well. So they'd obviously want Lewis to be getting the most points possible and such and so forth. But definitely, if they had to choose who would be leading the charge, they would definitely choose it to be George. And without trying to lean too hard into George, well, he's definitely feeling the good effects of being touted as the number one driver, or being treated as the number one driver. In Imola, he took a pit stop behind Lewis, a voluntary pit stop, and was essentially negotiating to have Lewis pave the way and let him pass to regain a position without having to fight him when he comes through. Obviously, he didn't come through, he didn't make it past Lewis, but him burning up his tires and then trying to negotiate to re-overtake Lewis via the team definitely tells you that George has a lot more confidence in terms of trying to get what he wants within the team. And he definitely knows that he is now the number one in that Mercedes organization. But overall, I personally think it's probably going to get slightly worse towards the end of the season, with it all petering out. For all intensive purposes, Mercedes aren't really in a fight for anything this year. They're pretty secure in no man's land in fourth place. And Lewis and George, P6 and P5 or P whatever, it won't make much of a difference in terms of the Drivers' Championship. So in the Constructors, they're definitely not going to catch McLaren. But at the same time, it seems like Aston Martin are a bit too far behind to really put a challenge in for them. So it does seem like Lewis has made the right decision and is just trying to ride out the rest of the year, because he sees the team that he's going to is winning races, multiple races this year, and seems to be on a good path to getting a championship-ready car for next year. But that's really all I have to say on the topic. If you guys think that I missed something or that Lewis is being sabotaged, let me know. I don't think there's too much to dig into this other than, I guess, the general story of a driver being phased out of a team. It's just that Lewis has been in Mercedes so long, it can feel a bit weird to see Mercedes favoring another driver and putting Lewis to the side almost.